Hello, my name's Ali Cameron, and I was employed by the Aberdeen City Council Archaeological Unit for nearly 25 years. And one of the projects that I was involved with was at St Fittick's Church. This is it, you can see it here, overlooking Balnagasc Torry in the area called Nigg. And the project involved this church here, which on the right you can see the Google Earth image showing the church here, the graveyard, little burial vault, and a wall which we'll come back to. Nowadays it's right next to where the new Aberdeen Harbour South is being developed, and so the image here is you can see all the concrete blocks for the building of that project, and you can see where it sits just here on this headland, Torry Battery here, just to the south of Aberdeen. And this is some images of it. We took a lot of images of the church, including ones like this one here from a cherry picker, and recorded upstanding walls. So this wall, which I was saying, it sort of sits in the park there, and we were able to do some excavation and interpret that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. This is Roy's map, mid-18th century map, showing Balnagasc here and the Kirk of Nigg here. See Nigg Bay here. Not a huge amount of detail, but again you'll see on Roy where he's showing the areas that have been cultivated, and so you can see here rigs, different angles of rigs, and again I'll come back to that when we talk about the excavation itself. This is the first edition Ordnance Survey of 1865, and at that time you can see this is the church as you would visit it today. 4 walls, no roof, so that's not roofed, but you can see here there's the little Watcher's House, Birkin House, which is roofed, and also these buildings, so agricultural buildings, and the manse here, which we'll talk about in a moment. And there are quite a number of old photographs, and one of the parts of the project was to look at the different photographs, see how it's developed. Here you can see the church. This is sort of from the southeast, and so you're looking towards the manse here and the agricultural buildings. You can see there's a lot of trees in the graveyard, which there are not today. And one of the parts of the project was to look at the gravestones, and we worked with the North East Family History Society to record by photography, so taking at least one good image of each of the gravestones as it was in 2004 and 2005, and then a transcript of all the writing that could be seen on them. These are some really nice ones here. This is John Robin, lovely ship in 3 dimensions, and here you've got 17th century gravestones, obviously with the stylized skulls, and here you've got the skull and crossbones, and so all of that was recorded photographically. We drew a plan of the graveyard, so all the stones that could be seen at that time, the church with all the gravestones here, including the little Davidson graveyard there. And then we had a team of people, so archaeologists, volunteers, North East Family History Society, who all got involved in recording. So we learnt, the archaeological volunteers learnt from the North East Family History Society the different techniques of recording. So not all the stones were visible on every day. Some of the we need the sun to come out on some of them, and so here, well, you can see the photographer's technique here up on the gravestone, to get the best image. You can see here using water. So what we didn't do was to really scrape the gravestones. We did very light touch. If we were going to scrape anything, it was with wood, but nothing, nothing like metal. But we used things like water and chalk to bring out some of the writing. And this is a very good example of the same stone on 3 different occasions, with the sort of sun in, and then with quite a bright sun, and then this is on the right is with a low sun, like a low winter sun, and this is by far the best time to see a lot of stones. If you go to stone circles or any archaeological sites, if you go in the winter with a low sun and just get the right angle, the beautiful contrast here between the stone and the writing. There's some unusual stones, so some have disappeared since the recording was last done, But there's some really nice stones. John Marno here, Merchant Burgess, and this is unusual because he's got his inscription here with his memento moris, but on the right hand side, nothing in that at all, and there never has been. And so what happened, we're not sure. His wife was buried elsewhere, maybe married again, but there's some sort of quite unusual and interesting stones like that. And quite a number of things like marble tablets. Now this is on the wall of the church, and you can see one here where it's all covered in ivy. And so most of that we did not remove. If you remove ivy from something stone or mortared, you know, you can do a lot more damage. So it was a very light touch that we used on this, recording only things really that we could see quite easily. And this is Gavin Bell from Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society, who worked with us, and they're volunteers. This is him researching. I just put this stone up here because this is the only stone that was actually originally for a woman, Jane Baxter, who was the nurse and friend in the family of Dr. Archibald Simpson. And that's the only one of the sort of 128 or so stones that was actually for a woman. And this is the book. On the right hand side you can see the image here. These you can be bought online, and these give a record of all the transcriptions of the gravestones, including the ones that had been previously recorded a few decades before. And so it tells you what the stone looked like then and what it looks like now. We did some recording of the church as well, so you can see here that the gable here, you've got stone, one gable missing, but basically the church was harled, covered in mortar here, and then the wall heads here capped with concrete. So that would have protected the church quite well. You can see the doors have been left open, some of them. But we did some recording, so we did measured drawings and photography of the medieval stonework that you can see. So I mean the church is originally mentioned in a document 1189 to 99, where the church is given by William I to the Abbey of Arbroath, and we're not sure if there's much of that 12th century church left. Some of these mouldings could certainly be there that date, but certainly a medieval in date. But the church has been messed around a little bit with. Obviously the windows, you can see here, windows have been blocked. And there's this interesting little, people call it the leper squint, and in fact I think it had marked on leper squint. But it appears probably to have been a bigger aperture, and this little small aperture left, and it's unlikely that this is a medieval leper squint, which was traditionally where lepers or people who people thought had leprosy would it be able to watch the service from outside. There's also this little chain here, which traditionally these were put by a church to chain up women or gossipers. Again, I'm not sure how old that chain is, but often these churches were enhanced with things that they thought would have been in them. So these medieval chains probably were much, much later, and they knew that they would have had them, and so they've been put in. So it's a little difficult with all this harling on to tell exactly how old some of these features are. We also looked at the Watchers or Birkin House, which is in the corner of the graveyard here. And we looked, there's a font within the church at the moment, and another font here on the top right. You can see here Neil Curtis from University of Aberdeen Marshall Museum Collections have one in their collection which says it's from St Fittick's as well. So I suppose over 600 or 700 years, you could easily have used two fonts. So it's possible that both of these do originate from St Fittick's. Again, there's not really any way of telling exactly where these come from. And then this little Davidson Island, this was Colonel Davidson and his family who were buried in this little, you see, I've just marked it here. And so if you go and visit, you can go and look in that, as well as obviously getting into the graveyard. But this is the crypt or burial place of the Davidson family, who were the landowners of this area for quite a number of years. This is a wonderful book of St Fittick. I've actually put a reference to it at the end, but you can see the bell cot there, which has on it MM 1704, and MM Minister 1704, And it may be that that was for the minister, Richard Maitland at the time. We're not quite sure exactly. That's not mentioned in every reference, this inscription. There's also a bell, which obviously would have come from the bell cut. Now, this is in a local church in Torry, and was made by John Mowat in Old Aberdeen in 1759, and it's got an inscription in Latin telling you who made it and when they made it. It cost £153 and 4 shillings at that time to make, and in Latin it says, "Sabbaths I proclaim, funerals I toll." So that's a lovely object, of course, which is not at the church, where it originally was, but is in safekeeping locally in Torry. So as part of the project, we wanted to look at this wall that I showed you is upstanding next to the graveyard here, and so we used a number of techniques. We used geophysical survey, so we did some resistivity survey. This was some of the University of Aberdeen archaeology students at that time, before the archaeology department got going, and we used a number of different techniques, magnetometer, and this is resistivity, and it did show walls and remains, and so we were able to target our archaeological trenches based on that survey. So here you can see the excavation progressing, you can see buildings appearing, and obviously the church in the background here, and you can see Nigg Bay. So before I talk about the actual building that was standing there, underneath that and earlier than that, we found these intriguing lines of stones, which seem to be a form of terracing. And you can see here, this is a sort of a sketch of what it might have, or sort of representation of what it was like. That upslope you had a higher level of soil, and then as in a terrace, you go to the Mediterranean, you see these terraces regularly, and the natural slope sloping down. And you can see here that the map I showed you, the Roy map, here is showing the fields again, as I said. So this is probably representing that in the 18th century before, this was a cultivated area, and so this was to stop the soil blowing away and to accumulate a good depth of soil for cultivation. And so we found the manse, which is obviously what we were hoping to do, and you can see here the full size of the front wall of the manse here. You can see the driveway, which is a metal surface, so small stones pattered down. You can see the wall of the garden here, and then into the garden we excavated 2 or 3 small trenches, but the garden was essentially full with a lot of rubble and then some garden soil on top of it. So probably a lot of the demolition material had been dumped into the garden after the demolition of the building. So the manse was originally 1759 was built, and there would have been a manse on the site before that, but this excavation didn't really prove that whether the shape or size of an earlier manse, and it may be that the manse was just developed on the sort of similar footprint, and so we weren't quite seeing any additions. But you can see here where we have family photos which people lent to us at the time, and so you can see the manse in the background of this sort of family picnic, and also one here showing it looking out over the bay. And also here, this is wonderful, from one of the books of photographs of Aberdeen, showing it in the background here, white harled. Again, a lot of picnickers and families came to Nigg Bay, and so the manse does appear in a small number of photographs. And a few of the things that we excavated included these steps down to from the driveway that I was mentioning down into the garden level, a few steps down, and again one of our visitors was so excited to be able to tell us that they had a family photograph of the ladies of the family standing next to these steps, and you get a really good idea of what the manse looked like in the background as well. So really lovely details that we were able to show people on site when they visited, and they were able to say to us, well, I remember that, or I know what that was. And so we've got some great stories. Obviously, in this short talk, I can't tell you more, but a lot of great stories about the manse. There's also this wall that I mentioned earlier, and we were able to excavate a trench next to that and find out that this was an agricultural building. So you can see here it's got this fantastic water washed cobbled floor. You can see the walls here as well, and a detail of that. Now, in Aberdeenshire and locally, that's called a greep. So this is a floor which is made of small stones, which can be easily cleaned and is in use in agricultural buildings. So all the waste from the animals then gets cleaned away, washed away, swept away, and it's easy to keep clean. And here's an image, wonderful old image of the agricultural building. Here you can see the agricultural machinery. You can obviously see the now either a stack or a midden here, and also here, and obviously the church in the background. And we had lots of volunteers. This was a really good project. Local people came to help us. And so you've got here a group of different archaeology students, local volunteers, archaeologists. And here's one of the archaeologists helping some of the local kids to do a metal detector survey. So we got them to do lots and lots of different activities on the dig. But included, we often use metal detectors as archaeologists. We use them to go over spoil heaps to see what we've missed, or particularly if we're machining. And so this was them going over the spoil heap, and they found lots of fantastic things, quite recent things, late 19th, 20th century things. And we had a lot of publicity, so lots of people in the photograph in the paper, and that brought in more people who told us about their memories of it. There was a boy who used to deliver the newspaper, and he would cycle quickly up the drive, throw the paper and cycle quickly away because he thought it was haunted, and it must have seemed quite an interesting building sitting there on its own right next to the bay. And if he was delivering in the early morning or in the evenings, in the winter particularly, I can understand that he might have been a bit spooked by it. And we had lots of tours, so we had lots of local people came and visited us and got a tour. This was Judith Stones, who was the keeper of archaeology at the time in Aberdeen City, and she explained, what we'd been finding. And we had lots of the local the older Tory residents, of course, who remembered it and who, as I say, told us lots of stories about their memories of these buildings. Unfortunately, this is a very poor copy of this drawing, but Claire Agnew, who was an illustrator with us at the time, did this drawing based on the excavation, old photographs and drawings. So you can see the church here in its heyday with its roof and its two gables and its obviously apertures open, the agricultural building in the middle here. And so this would have been an active manse farm. So the minister would have lived in the house with his family, and they would have been servants who cultivated the garden area and who grew crops and kept animals for the putting on the table of the manse, essentially. And we know these manses were fairly wealthy, and so he would have had quite a large area, including obviously fields round about. And this is a book of some Fitticks I mentioned, which if you haven't, go and have a look at it online. You can see it at electricscotland.com, and it has wonderful images, including ones like this one, of St Fitticks and the area. If you haven't visited, there certainly were information boards up. You used to have to go and get a key, but latterly I don't know whether I think you can get into the graveyard now to have a look round. It's definitely worth going and having a look. And then just a really odd one at the end, that we were handed this, which has got a date on it of, I think it's 77, it says in the corner of it. And we were trying to think what an earth date it was, but we realised it must be a 20th century image. We were trying to push it into the 19th century, but somebody had painted this in the 1977, we think. And so that's what it looked like at the time, before all the buildings were demolished and really sort of left as a ruin. And just to say thanks to everybody who took part, the students, the archaeologists, people who came from all over the place. Some people saw about it and came on the dig for a day. They were travelling around Scotland. And to everybody who worked at Aberdeen Art Gallery and Museums, and who took part and helped with the excavation. Thank you very much.